Disclaimer: this story explores mature emotional themes related to love, self-discovery, and personal growth. While it does not contain explicit content, viewer discretion is advised. I never thought one night could change everything. That a single moment, a single discovery, could unravel years of love, trust, and the quiet understanding that had held my marriage together. But that's exactly what happened. And once the truth was out, there was no way to take it back. It started as an ordinary evening, just like any other. My husband and I had finished dinner, the dishes were put away, and the house had settled into its usual nighttime silence. He sat on the couch, scrolling through his phone, while I busied myself in the bedroom, pretending everything was fine. Pretending that my heart wasn't pounding. That my hands weren't shaking. That the weight of the secret I had been carrying for so long wasn't suffocating me. I told myself he would never find out. That I had been careful. That the past was in the past, and it didn't matter anymore. But deep down, I knew better. The truth has a way of surfacing, no matter how hard you try to bury it. And that night, it finally did. At first, I didn't realize anything was wrong. The house was quiet, too quiet. And then I heard it, the sound of a chair scraping against the floor, the slow, deliberate footsteps coming down the hall. My heart stopped. When I turned around, he was standing in the doorway, his face unreadable. But his eyes told me everything. He knew. I opened my mouth to speak, to explain, to say something, anything, but the words wouldn't come. The air between us felt heavy, thick with something I couldn't name. His phone was still in his hand, the screen glowing in the dim light. My stomach dropped. Had he seen something? Read something? Did someone tell him? Seconds stretched into eternity as we stood there, staring at each other, the silence pressing down on us like a storm about to break. I could see the conflict in his face: anger, confusion, hurt. He wanted answers. He deserved answers. But I wasn't sure if I could give them to him. Because sometimes, the truth isn't just painful, it's devastating. And I knew that once I told him, once everything was out in the open, nothing would ever be the same again. But he wasn't going to wait. His voice was calm, too calm. "Do you have something to tell me?" And in that moment, I realized this was it. This was the moment that would decide everything. What would I say? Would I tell him the truth? Would I try to lie my way out of it? Or had I already lost him, no matter what I did? I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself, but my hands were still trembling. My mind raced, searching for the right words, the right way to fix this. But before I could speak, before I could even think, he held up his phone. And what I saw on the screen made my blood run cold. This was the night my husband discovered everything. And nothing would ever be the same again. My breath caught in my throat as I stared at the screen. My hands felt ice cold, my heartbeat thundered in my ears. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. There it was, clear as day, something I never wanted him to see. Something I never wanted to face. He didn't say anything right away. He just watched me, waiting. His grip on the phone tightened slightly, his jaw clenched. The silence between us was unbearable. I could feel the weight of his thoughts pressing down on me, demanding an explanation. I swallowed hard, my mind racing, trying to think of what to say, where to start. But how do you explain something when you don't even know if the truth will save you or destroy everything? This isn't what you think, I finally managed to whisper, though even I didn't believe my own words. He let out a breath, a quiet, bitter laugh escaping his lips. "Then tell me what it is." His voice was calm, too controlled. That was always more terrifying than shouting, because it meant he was holding everything in, barely keeping himself together. I wanted to run, to rewind time, to erase whatever he had found. But it was too late. His eyes searched mine, looking for answers I wasn't sure I could give. "How long?" he asked. Just 2 words, but they sent a shiver down my spine. I hesitated, and that alone was an answer. His expression darkened, and he shook his head slightly, his disappointment cutting deeper than any accusation could. "I trusted you," he said, his voice quieter now, but the pain in it was unmistakable. Those words broke me. More than anger, more than anything else, It was the pain in his voice that shattered my heart. I reached for him, instinctively, but he stepped back, putting space between us. That hurt more than I expected. "Please," I said, my voice trembling. "Let me explain." He exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. "Then explain," he said, but his voice didn't hold much hope. It was like he already knew whatever I said wouldn't change what he had seen. I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to gather my thoughts, trying to find the right words. But there were no right words. No perfect way to make this okay. When I opened them again, he was still watching me, waiting. I took a shaky breath. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," I started, my voice barely above a whisper. "I never wanted to hurt you." He let out a humorless laugh. "Well, you did," he said, his voice rough. "So tell me, was it worth it?" I flinched. The bitterness in his tone, the pain in his eyes, it was too much. I had always thought I knew him, understood him, but in this moment, he felt like a stranger. And maybe I did too. I shook my head, tears burning at the edges of my vision. "It wasn't about that," I said quickly. "It was never about hurting you." "Then what was it about?" he demanded. "Because I need to understand. I need to know why." His voice cracked slightly on the last word, and it nearly broke me. I wanted to tell him everything. To lay it all out, to beg for forgiveness, to somehow take it all back. But I didn't know if he would ever look at me the same way again. And that terrified me more than anything. The room felt too small, the air too thick. Everything that had felt safe, steady, certain, was gone. I looked at him, really looked at him, and realized this was it. The moment everything changed. And I had no idea if we would survive it. The silence between us stretched longer, heavier, like a storm gathering strength before it finally broke. I could see the way his mind was working, piecing things together, trying to understand. But I also knew that no explanation I gave would undo what had already been done. He turned away for a moment, running a hand through his hair, his shoulders rising and falling with deep, measured breaths. He was trying to stay calm, trying to process it all. But the way his fingers curled into a fist at his side told me he was barely holding it together. I took a small step forward. "I never meant to keep this from you," I said softly, my voice unsteady. I didn't know how to tell you." He let out a sharp breath and turned back to me. "That's not an excuse," he said. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through me like a blade. "You had plenty of chances. Plenty of time." He shook his head, his jaw tightening. "So why now? Why am I finding out like this?" I opened my mouth, but the words felt stuck. There was no easy way to say it. No way to make this hurt any less. His eyes searched mine, waiting, pleading, and for the first time, I realized just how deeply I had hurt him. This wasn't just about what he had found, this was about the fact that I hadn't trusted him with the truth. That I had let him believe one version of our life while I carried another, hidden away in the shadows. He took a step back, putting more distance between us. "Did you think I wouldn't find out?" he asked. His voice wasn't angry anymore, just raw, wounded. "Or did you think it wouldn't matter?" "No," I said quickly, shaking my head. I thought I could protect you." He let out a hollow laugh, one that held no real amusement. "Protect me," he repeated. "From what?" "The truth." He stared at me for a long moment, and then his expression hardened. "Or were you protecting yourself?" I felt my throat tighten, because deep down, I knew he was right. Maybe, in some way, I had been trying to protect him. But a bigger part of me had been afraid. Afraid of what would happen if he knew everything. Afraid of losing him. I was scared, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. I was scared of what this would do to us. He exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "And what do you think this is doing to us now?" I didn't have an answer. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The weight of everything we weren't saying filled the space between us. Then, finally, he looked at me again, his expression unreadable. "I need to know everything," he said quietly. "No more half-truths. No more hiding." I nodded slowly, my chest tightening. This was it. The moment I had been dreading. But just as I was about to speak, A noise from the other room made both of us freeze. A faint buzzing sound, his phone, vibrating again in his hand. He glanced down at the screen, and whatever he saw made his expression change. His grip on the phone tightened, his jaw tensed, and for a moment, I saw something flicker in his eyes, something new. Confusion. Doubt. And just like that, I realized something. Whatever he had found, whatever had brought us to this moment, was only the beginning. His fingers hovered over the phone screen, his expression unreadable. I could see the tension in his jaw, the way his chest rose and fell with steady but controlled breaths. The room felt colder now, heavier with something I couldn't name. He didn't look at me right away. Instead, he stared at whatever was on his phone, his thumb hesitating as if he was debating whether to open the message or put the phone down entirely. I swallowed hard, my pulse racing. "What is it?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. For a second, he didn't respond. Then, finally, he turned the screen toward me. My stomach dropped. A message. A name I recognized. A name that shouldn't have been there. I felt like the air had been knocked from my lungs. My hands went cold, my fingers curling into my palms. This wasn't supposed to happen. He wasn't supposed to see this. His eyes locked onto mine. "So?" His voice was calm, too calm. It sent a shiver down my spine. "Are you going to explain this to?" I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. My mind was racing, scrambling for the right words, but all I could hear was the pounding of my own heartbeat. My voice caught, my throat dry. "It's not what you think." A bitter smile tugged at the corner of his lips. "You keep saying that." He exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "But every time I turn around, there's something else." I took a step closer, desperate to close the space between us, to reach him, but he didn't move. His gaze stayed on me, hard and unreadable. "How long?" he asked again, that same question that had burned between us before. I hesitated, and that was enough. His grip on the phone tightened before he finally set it down on the table, almost too carefully, as if he didn't trust himself not to throw it. He ran a hand through his hair, letting out a slow breath. "I need to know the truth," he said, his voice quieter now but filled with something deeper, something that scared me. "No more excuses. No more trying to protect me." He met my eyes, and this time, there was no anger, just exhaustion, just pain. "Tell me everything." My throat felt tight. I wanted to, I really did. But I also knew that once I said it, once the truth was out, there would be no turning back. I took a shaky breath. My heart was pounding, every instinct in me screaming to run, to fix this somehow before it was too late. But it already was. Just as I was about to speak, another sound broke the silence. A knock. It was soft, hesitant, but it sent a jolt of panic through me. I saw the way my husband's expression changed, the way his brows furrowed, the way his lips pressed into a thin line. We both stood frozen for a moment, staring at each other, neither of us moving. The knock came again. Louder this time. And that was when I knew this wasn't just about the messages. This wasn't just about what he had found. There was more. Something neither of us was ready for. Something waiting for us on the other side of that door. The knock echoed again, sharper this time, cutting through the thick silence between us. My husband's eyes flickered toward the door, then back to me. I could see the thoughts racing through his mind, the unspoken questions forming, the hesitation creeping in. Neither of us moved. I felt my pulse in my throat, every nerve in my body on high alert. Whoever was on the other side of that door, they were part of this now. They were part of whatever was unraveling between us. A part one hadn't planned for. My husband's voice was low, steady. "Are you expecting someone?" I shook my head automatically, but the truth was, I didn't know anymore. Maybe I should have expected this. Maybe I had been so caught up in hiding things, in trying to keep my world from collapsing, that I didn't see how close it was to falling apart on its own. The knock came again, more insistent. My husband took a step toward the door, and my breath caught. "Wait," I said quickly, reaching for his arm. He paused, turning to look at me. His expression was unreadable, but there was something in his eyes, something deeper than anger now. "Why?" he asked, his voice quiet but sharp. "Who's out there?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. Because the truth was, I had no idea. And that scared me more than anything. His gaze stayed on me for a moment longer, and then, before I could stop him, he pulled his arm free and stepped forward, unlocking the door. The air in the room felt impossibly still as he swung it open. And then I saw who was standing there. My stomach dropped. It wasn't who I expected. Not even close. It was her. A face from the past. A face I hadn't seen in years, one I had convinced myself I'd never have to see again. She stood there, her expression tense, her eyes flicking from me to my husband. There was something almost hesitant in the way she held herself, as if she wasn't sure whether she had made the right choice by coming here. But it was too late for that now. My husband glanced at me, then back at her. Confusion passed over his face. He didn't recognize her. Of course, he didn't. Why would he? But I did. I gripped the edge of the table, trying to steady myself. "What are you doing here?" My voice came out smaller than I intended, the weight of the moment pressing down on me. She hesitated, shifting her gaze toward my husband again. "I need to talk to you," she said, but it wasn't directed at me. It was meant for him. My breath caught. My husband frowned, his jaw tightening. "Me?" She nodded. "It's about," she stopped, glancing at me. "It's about what she hasn't told you." The room seemed to tilt. I felt my husband's gaze land on me, heavy, questioning. But I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. Because I already knew what she was about to say. And I knew that once the words left her lips, there would be no going back. The weight of her words settled over the room like a thick fog, suffocating and inescapable. My husband stood frozen, his eyes locked onto her, waiting for something, an explanation, a reason, a way to make sense of it all. But I knew there was nothing she could say to make this easier. Nothing I could say to fix what was already broken. His voice was hoarse when he finally spoke. "What do you mean, it's not over?" She hesitated, glancing at me for just a second before looking away. I could tell she wasn't sure how much she should say, if she should even be here at all. But it was too late for second-guessing now. I swallowed hard, my hands trembling at my sides. "I didn't want this to touch you," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "I thought if I kept it away, if I handled it on my own, you'd never have to know." My husband let out a sharp breath, shaking his head. "Handled what?" His tone was laced with frustration, exhaustion, hurt. "What have you been hiding from me?" The woman shifted on her feet, exhaling slowly. "She was trying to protect me," she said, softer now, like she regretted dragging this into the light. "But it's not just about me anymore." A cold chill spread through my body. I had spent so much time keeping secrets, making sure the past stayed buried, but the thing about the past is that it never stays quiet forever. My husband's gaze darted between us. "So tell me," he said, his voice strained. "The whole truth this time." I closed my eyes for a brief second before finally letting it out. It wasn't just one night. It wasn't just one mistake, I admitted, my heart pounding. It was a decision. One I made because I thought it was the only way. His face twisted with something unreadable. "To protect her." I nodded. "Yes. And to protect you. To protect us." He let out a humorless laugh, rubbing a hand down his face. "You really thought lying to me would protect us?" I didn't answer. Because I knew that, deep down, he was right. Lies don't protect. They only delay the inevitable. The woman took a slow step back toward the door, sensing the finality in the air. "I shouldn't have come," she murmured, almost to herself. I thought you deserved to know." My husband exhaled sharply, glancing at her, then back at me. "I don't even know what to do with this," he admitted. "I don't know how to look at you right now." My chest tightened. "I never wanted to hurt you," I whispered. "But you did," he said, his voice heavy with something close to resignation. "And now I don't know if we can come back from this." The words hit harder than I expected, knocking the breath from my lungs. For the first time, I realized that maybe this wasn't something we could fix. Maybe no amount of explanations, no desperate apologies, would change the fact that trust, once broken, doesn't always get put back together. Silence stretched between us, and for the first time in a long time, I had no idea what came next. Finally, my husband stepped back, reaching for his phone off the table. "I need time," he said simply. And with that, he turned and walked out the door. The woman hesitated, as if debating whether to say something, but in the end, she just gave me a small, sad nod before slipping away, leaving me standing alone in the doorway. I stood there for a long time, listening to the sound of the night outside, feeling the weight of everything that had just happened settle onto my shoulders. The truth was out. And now, I had to live with it.